皆さんおはようございます。ジャーナリストの岩上安身です。私は都心のあるホテルに来ておりまして、これからオリバー・ストーン監督とともにこの大著、もう一つのアメリカ史をお書きになったピーター・カズニック教授、ピーター・カズニック教授にお話を伺いたいと思います。ピーターさん、おはようございます。
はい、
Good morning。よろしくお願いします。ピーターさんとは長崎で、お話を伺ったりしました。今日は単独でインタビューを伺いたいと思います。早速よろしいでしょうか。本題に入りたいと思います。今、日本はとても不思議な曲がり角にいます。2度の核攻撃を受け、1度の原子力事故を起こし、なお核にしがみついております。非常に高コストで非常にハイリスクな原発を維持し続けようといるわけですけれども、これはまたアメリカがそのようにしろというふうに、オーダーした命令したせいでもあります。アーミテージ、それからジョン・ハムレのような人たちがしきりに原発を続けるということを言いました。で、導入の経緯を考えてみると、導入した時はこれは核兵器の保有に動機がありました。したがって、隠されていた目的があらわになってきたのではないか、核兵器を保有しようとしているのではないかというような気がします。今現状、あなたはどのようにご覧になっていますか。日本の意図というものをどのように見ていますか。またそれを原発を続けると言い続けるアーミテージのような人たちの意図はどこにあるのでしょうか。
Japan is at a very strange crossroads. Japan was attacked twice by the atomic bombs and one severe nuclear accident, but they're still clinging to nuclear. They are trying to restart high-cost, high-risk nuclear power reactors, partly because the United States is telling them to do so. Especially people like Richard Armitage and John Hamre. Behind the introduction of the nuclear power to Japan, there was a plan or wish for Japan to own nuclear weapons. Mm-hmm. So now it seems that the original motive is coming to the surface. It looks like Japan is moving toward owning nuclear weapons. And again, behind such move, there's intention of people like Armitage and Hamre. What is your thought on such a move? What is your view?
I think it would be a very big mistake for Japan to reopen the nuclear power reactors. Right now, only 2 of the 50 are functioning, but there's a lot of pressure to open most of the other reactors. The history of this is very, very important and interesting. In my own studies, I studied a lot about Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace program. Now, the reason why Eisenhower made his famous Atoms for Peace speech back in December 1953 is because he was trying to normalize the use of nuclear weapons. He wanted to erase the line between conventional weapons and nuclear weapons to make nuclear weapons more usable. It's interesting for Eisenhower because in 1945 he criticized the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He wanted to get rid of nuclear weapons. He wanted the United States to give up its nuclear weapons in 1945 and for the world to abolish nuclear weapons. But as the Cold War evolved and as he moved toward the presidency, he changed his position. Now he was more concerned with the question of the cost of nuclear weapons. And the cost of conventional armies, so he decided to cut the size of the army and replace it with nuclear weapons because it would be more cost effective. He was afraid of of a huge military budget. And so he relied on nuclear weapons. When Eisenhower became president, the United States had about 1,000 nuclear weapons. When he left the White House, the United States had about 23,000 nuclear weapons. When his budgeting cycle was finished, the United States had 30,000 nuclear weapons. So Eisenhower was the main proponent of nuclear weapons. But there was still a stigma attached to nuclear weapons. They were not acceptable to much of the world. So Eisenhower and Dulles and the people in the administration thought they have to make nuclear weapons acceptable, and that their best strategy for doing that was to sell the peaceful atom. So Eisenhower was cynical from the beginning. A big part of the reason behind his Atoms for Peace program was not peaceful atoms, it was military atoms. He wanted to justify and legitimize and accustom the world to nuclear power in various forms so he could develop his nuclear weapons. And the place where several people in the United States wanted to build the first nuclear reactor was Hiroshima itself. But the Japanese people were very opposed to nuclear energy at this point, and nuclear weapons especially. And after the Lucky Dragon incident, the Daigo Fukuryamaru incident in 1954, there was a tremendous outcry in Japan against nuclear weapons. So the United States, working with certain allies in Japan, like Shoriki, the former Class A war criminal from the Yomiuri Shimbun, began to try to convince the Japanese public that nuclear power was a good thing, and to encourage the development of nuclear reactors in Hiroshima and other Japanese cities. The first time I came to Hiroshima back in 1995, I was very surprised to learn that 35% of Hiroshima's energy comes from nuclear power. So this has became an obsession in Japan, a fixation. When Eisenhower started his Atoms for Peace program, he knew, and he was warned by the scientists, that this was going to lead to weapons proliferation. They went into that with their eyes wide open. They knew that that was the danger, and it has. And you got a situation like Japan now, which has a massive amount of plutonium, which it would be very easy to develop into weapons for Japan. Japan has enough for hundreds of nuclear weapons on hand now. We sometimes, in English, we'd say that Japan is a screwdriver twist away from developing nuclear weapons. So the danger in Japan, the trade-off with reopening those nuclear reactors in Japan, in a country that's got so much instability geologically, with the possibility of more tsunamis and earthquakes, the risk in Japan is very, very high. Plus, the other thing about it is that these are actually nuclear bombs that are welcoming a terrorist attack. Had the Al-Qaeda on 9/11 in the United States hit a nuclear reactor instead of the World Trade Center or the Pentagon, the damage would have been dozens of times more, maybe hundreds of times more. So these are also potential terrorist targets because they're somewhat vulnerable and accessible, and would wreak tremendous havoc if that happens. So I think the situation in Japan, as you're suggesting, is one in which there are certain right-wing elements who work with similar elements in the United States who do want to see Japan reopen their nuclear reactors. And there's been a faction in the United States that wanted to see Japan not only rescind Article 9, but actually develop its own military forces in an aggressive way and develop nuclear weapons. That's been a faction for a long time in the United States. Going back to the Korean War, American leaders wanted Japan to get rid of Article 9, and that pressure has steadily built. Abe, of course, is dedicated to doing so. And Abe, I know there are people around Abe who would love to see Japan develop nuclear weapons. It would be a terrible mistake at this point. This region has enough nuclear power, enough nuclear powers with China and Korea already, but other countries would follow suit very likely if Japan does develop nuclear weapons. There's a memory in Asia about Japanese atrocities during World War II. The Asian people have not forgotten that. So even though the United States is trying to frighten them into a pact against China now, they're very wary about Japan developing that kind of military force again. And so I think there would be an outcry against it, and other Asian nations would also want their own nuclear weapons. So that would be a very dangerous cycle to begin.
Summary ですね。
はい、結構です。はい。
原発の再稼働については非常に間違っていることだと思います。現在も50基のうち2基しか、起動していませんが、他のものを再稼働するプレッシャーがかかっています。アイゼンハワーの原子力の平和利用についてですけれども、これは1953年、
はい、
これはあれですね、核兵器を通常化する、要するに特別な兵器ではなくて、通常の兵器化するような、動きの、一環、だったんですね。アイゼンハワーは日本への核使用、核兵器攻撃を批判していたのにもかかわらず、自分が大統領になる頃になって態度が変わったわけですよね。アイゼンハワーの就任時期には1000発だった核兵器保有がもう最後の時期には2万3000から3万といった数に膨れ上がりました。それで原子力の平和利用について、だから原子力の平和利用というのは、そもそも、核兵器の正当化というか核兵器の通常兵器化、に使われたということなのです。で広島に最初の原子炉を、作るといったような、計画があったとも聞いていまして、第五福竜丸事件、の時に、非常に反核運動が高まったわけですけれども、アメリカはその同盟国、日本あれですね、正力松太郎といった、旧戦犯だった人間を使って、あれですね、原子力がいいというようなイメージを広げ
読売新聞と言ってましたね。
読売新聞と言ってました。はい。で95年、95年には私が初めて日本に来た時広島の電力が 35% が原子力によって賄われているとびっくりした覚えが、あります。結局、原子力平和利用が、核兵器の、拡散のために、意図があったのではないかと思います。日本も今、非常にたくさんのプルトニウムを持っていて、かなりの何百発もの核兵器を作れる、もうほとんど日本はもう核兵器保有国になる一歩手前みたいな感じに思われています。でこれは、日本みたいに地形的にね、地震とか津波とか大変不安定なところに再稼働するのは大変危険だと思いますし、やはりテロリストの、攻撃のことを考えると非常にリスクが高いと言えるんじゃないかと、思います。でアメリカの一部に一派アミテージとか出ましたけども、その一派は救助を捨てさせ、もっと日本を再軍備化し、核兵器を持たせようというような目論みがあるのではないかと思います。これは朝鮮戦争の前後以来、救助を捨てさせるという動きがこれ今安倍に引き継がれていますけれども、非常にこれは危ないことであると思います。アジアにすでに北朝鮮、中国といった核保有国がありますし、日本はその戦術のアジアに対する残虐行為、これはアジアの国々が忘れて、いません。だから日本がその核保有というようなことに進んだら、やっぱアジアに対してアジアの中で非常に、懸念反発が広がるのではないかと思います。
今アーミテージらは日本を救助を捨てさせて軍事国家化させるように進んでいるというふうにおっしゃいました。でそれは核保有まで彼らは念頭に入れてるんでしょうか。例えばニュークリアシェアリングっていう核共有っていうんですけれども、アメリカの核を持たせるということですね。アメリカのコントロール下で核を持たせると